The room was quiet, except for the faint clinking of cutlery. Family dinners were supposed to be warm, a gathering of stories and laughter. But sometimes, silence carried more weight than any words. She had barely touched her food when it came. A voice, sharp, casual, but cutting with precision. "You are not even half the woman my mother is." The words dropped heavy against the table, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Glasses froze midway to lips. Forks hovered in midair. Every eye flicked, some toward her, some toward the speaker, her daughter-in-law, sitting with a calm smugness that seemed almost rehearsed. And in that suspended silence, something ancient stirred. She pushed her chair back. Not violently, not even loudly, just enough that the scrape of wood against tile whispered a truth: the line had been crossed. Her breathing slowed, her eyes lowered, not in shame, but in calculation. The narrator Sip's voice slips in, soft and steady, like a professor guiding you through a riddle. Why would such words cut so deeply? Why does one insult ripple louder than 100 compliments? And what would you do, seated at that table, when silence feels like surrender, and retaliation risks explosion? This wasn't just a spat. It wasn't just family drama. It was history finding its voice. For years, she had been the quiet force, the one who sacrificed without applause, the one who stitched broken moments back together, who carried burdens that no one named but everyone relied upon. And here she was, being reduced in a single sentence, dismissed as less than. Her heart thudded against her ribs, not from fear, but from restraint, because inside her, two paths were battling. One voice whispered, "Say nothing. Let it pass. Keep the peace." Another voice roared, "Stand now. Draw the line. Don't let them rewrite your worth." The family's silence made the decision heavier. No one leapt to her defense. No one spoke against the insult. They waited, watching, some curious, some complicit, some perhaps even agreeing. She placed her napkin on the table, slow, deliberate. Her hands were steady, though her pulse raced. And the narrator leans closer to us, pulling us into the intimacy of that moment. Every insult is more than words. It is a test, a mirror, a fork in the road. How we respond, or fail to respond, shapes not just the moment, but the legacy that follows. The daughter-in-law smirked slightly, as if to say, "I've won. I've silenced you." But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have guessed, was that this moment was about to awaken something far bigger than her own Barb. Because sometimes, an insult doesn't break you. Sometimes, it unlocks a story waiting to be told. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this one quiet dinner table confrontation, would ripple outward, changing the dynamics of an entire family and revealing truths buried for decades. The scrape of the chair finished its echo. A decision was forming, and as we lean in with the narrator, the question sharpens. Will she stay silent? Or will she rise, calm but unshaken, to teach everyone in that room, and perhaps even us, what dignity truly looks like? The camera lingers on her face, caught between composure and storm, and then fade to black. Mini cliffhanger. The audience is hooked. What happens next? Does she fight, retreat, or transform the moment? Words don't land in isolation. They carry echoes. Echoes of stories, histories, and scars that stretch far beyond the moment they're spoken. When her daughter-in-law said, "You're not even half the woman my mother is," the insult struck something deeper than just pride. It wasn't simply about comparisons between two women. No, it reached into a history she carried, silently for years. Let's pause here and look closer. This wasn't the first time she had been measured, diminished, or told she was less than. It had happened in subtle ways: the withheld compliment, the unacknowledged sacrifice, the expectation that her efforts were invisible, her worth assumed rather than affirmed. It happened when her husband came home late, thanking everyone but her for the peace of the household. It happened when her children succeeded, but no one remembered the hours she spent tutoring, cooking, praying, planning. It happened when she sat in rooms where her silence was mistaken for weakness and her composure mistaken for emptiness. And before her, it had happened to her mother and her mother's mother. This is what psychologists call intergenerational transmission of wounds. The pain doesn't start in one moment, it is passed down like an heirloom nobody asked for. Her own mother once told her, in a voice half resigned, half defiant, "A woman's strength is seen in what she endures silently." She believed it. For years, she lived by it. She endured. She bore the weight of expectations without complaint, believing her dignity lay in her restraint. But here's the truth. Silence has a cost. What we suppress doesn't disappear. It hardens. It lodges itself in the body, the mind, the spirit. And so when the insult came, it didn't hit a single wound. It collided with 1,000 unhealed echoes. The narrator leans in now, slow and deliberate. Insults feel heavier when they land on a foundation already cracked. A word spoken today can carry the weight of centuries if it mirrors what generations before us have already endured. And there sits another layer here. The daughter-in-law wasn't just speaking for herself. In families, roles are inherited, comparisons are inevitable. The daughter-in-law's "my mother" wasn't just a person. She was an archetype, the ideal woman that every other woman is silently measured against. Dutiful, perfect, flawless in sacrifice. But perfection, too, is a prison. Here lies the paradox. The mother-in-law had spent her life carrying burdens, yet she was dismissed. The daughter-in-law elevated her own mother as flawless, but unknowingly placed her in the same cage of expectations. And so the insult wasn't just an attack, it was a mirror, reflecting back a pattern of generational bias, women competing with women, measured against impossible standards, robbed of their individual worth. She sat there feeling the sting, but also the revelation rising like smoke. This isn't just about me, this is about all of us. This is about what we've been told to accept. Her hands tightened slightly on the edge of her chair. A whisper of memory surfaced. Her grandmother Sip's face, lined with resilience, whispering, "Child, never let them tell you who you are." She hadn't thought of those words in years. But now, in this silence, they pulsed in her chest like a heartbeat. The narrator Sip's voice comes in like a teacher, drawing the lesson on a board. Here Sips what that moment teaches us. Every insult carries two truths. The surface truth, what is said. And the deeper truth, why it cuts. Until we name the deeper truth, we remain prisoners to echoes we didn't create. She breathed, slowly, not to calm herself, but to steady something awakening. The wound was real, the insult was sharp, but underneath the pain, something stronger was stirring. Because the past had spoken, and she was beginning to listen. The camera lingers on her face again, not in anger, but in a kind of quiet, dawning clarity. Fade to black. Mini cliffhanger. The audience now understands. This story is about more than a dinner table insult. It's about generational scars, silent endurance, and the moment someone decides silence is no longer enough. The insult was simple. The roots were not. "You are not even half the woman my mother is." The words didn't float in the air by accident. They were born of a system, a culture, a set of unspoken rules that had been quietly pressing against her for years. This is how injustice often operates. Not loudly, not openly, but silently, through comparisons, through the weight of expectation, through the quiet but constant message that no matter what you do, it will never be enough. Let's slow this moment down. In every family, there are hierarchies. Some are named, others are invisible. And in this one, the hierarchy was clear. The daughter-in-law's mother, absent from the table, but towering in reputation, had become the gold standard. She was praised for her cooking, admired for her selflessness, idolized for her devotion. Her presence lingered in the room, not through her body, but through constant reference. And here's the trap. When one figure is elevated to perfection, everyone else becomes measured against an impossible yardstick. The narrator leans in, measured, like a mentor explaining the architecture of bias. Comparison is a quiet violence. It strips individuality. It reduces human worth to a contest. And it whispers, if you are not them, then you are nothing. For years, she had felt it. Subtle remarks. Side comments. The praise heaped on the other woman, not a rival in love, but in legacy. She always made meals from scratch. She never raised her voice. She managed the household without complaint. Every sentence built a pedestal, not for celebration, but for comparison. And each pedestal cast a shadow over her own existence. At first she endured it with grace. She told herself, it doesn't matter. I know what I've done. I know what I carry. But pressure, even when silent, builds. The human spirit bends under weight. This is what psychologists call chronic invalidation. The steady erosion of self-worth, not by open attack, but by neglect, by being unseen, by being quietly told you do not measure up. The insult at the table wasn't just cruel. It was the culmination of years of unspoken pressure, a breaking point. And here's the darker truth. Sometimes, families unknowingly weaponize silence. Not speaking up, not challenging the injustice, allows it to fester. When her daughter-in-law's words cut through the air, no one intervened, no one defended her. No one said, that was unfair. Their silence was not neutrality, it was consent. The narrator Sip's voice sharpened slightly, carrying the weight of accountability. When we remain silent in the face of cruelty, we do not stay neutral. We strengthen the cruelty. Silence is not absence, it is permission. Her eyes moved around the table. Her husband avoided her gaze. Her children pretended to be busy with their plates. Even the youngest, who didn't fully understand, sensed the tension but stayed quiet. The pressure in that silence was louder than the insult itself. And here is where the lesson sharpens. Systemic injustice doesn't always live in governments or corporations. Sometimes it lives at the dinner table, in the ways families choose who is praised, who is ignored, and who is silently diminished. She sat in that silence, the weight pressing harder. The urge to defend herself grew, but so did the risk. If she lashed out, she would be labeled bitter, overreacting, ungrateful. If she stayed silent, she would be confirming the insult. This was the impossible balance, damned if she did, erased if she didn't. The narrator softens again, guiding us closer to the emotional truth. Every person faces moments when pressure builds against them, invisible, unfair, relentless. The test is not simply how we endure it, but how we choose to redefine it. She breathed deeply. A decision was forming, not yet clear, not yet visible, but something in her chest whispered, this pressure won't break me, it will reveal me. The camera lingers on her eyes, steady, unblinking, holding back a storm. Fade to black. Mini cliffhanger, the audience now feels the crushing weight of systemic silence and unspoken bias. Suspense rises. How can she possibly respond to a system stacked against her without either losing her dignity or confirming the insult? The insult still lingered in the air. You consider, not even half the woman my mother is. The silence after those words wasn't empty. It was heavy, pulsing, demanding a response. And here she sat, suspended between two possible futures. One path was quick, fiery, immediate. She could snap back, unleash years of swallowed frustration, tear down the pedestal that her daughter-in-law's mother had been placed upon. Every sharp truth she had buried could come spilling out in one raw burst. But she knew how that would be received. They would shake their heads, call her bitter, dismiss her anger as weakness. The insult would be forgotten, but her reaction would be remembered. The other path was quiet, submissive, the familiar one. She could swallow her pride, laugh it off, act as though it meant nothing, keep the peace, at least on the surface. let the family dinner resume as though nothing had been said. But that too came at a cost. Silence would not protect her. It would confirm the narrative. It would etch the insult into permanence. And so, between fire and silence, she found herself at a crossroads. The narrator leans in, voice steady, like a mentor unpacking the weight of the moment. Life often presents us with two choices: to explode or to endure. But what if there is a third way, a way that neither destroys nor diminishes, but transforms? She looked at the faces around the table. Not one pair of eyes met hers. Some stared at their food, others at their glasses, all pretending not to notice the wound that had just been delivered. In that instant, a lesson crystallized. This wasn't just about her. This was about them. The ones who looked away. The ones who accepted cruelty as normal. The ones who would continue to do so, unless someone, at some point, disrupted the script. Here was the fork in the road. Retaliation would prove them right. Submission would let them stay comfortable. But a third way, quiet, intentional, grounded, could shift the very ground they all stood on. Her grandmother Sit's words came back again, like a whisper across generations. Child, never let them tell you who you are. Her hands were steady now. Her chair was still slightly pushed back, her body poised between leaving and staying. She thought of her children, watching silently. What would they learn from this? That cruelty can go unanswered? That dignity can be stripped without defense? Or that strength could be exercised without anger, without collapse? The weight of legacy pressed heavier than the insult itself. The narrator breaks the moment open for us. This is the moral fork in the road. Not just for her, but for all of us. Do we collapse under the weight of words? Do we lash out and let anger steal our clarity? Or do we rise calmly, strategically, to redefine the battlefield? Her heart raced, but her breathing was even. She felt the heat of anger, but also the clarity of choice. For the first time in a long while, she realized this moment is not happening to me, it is happening for me. And then, quietly she leaned forward, not to strike, not to shout, but to ground herself in a decision. The daughter-in-law's smirk lingered, still convinced she had won. The family still avoided her eyes. The room was still heavy with silence. But something had shifted, not around the table, but inside her. She didn't speak yet. Not because she was powerless, but because she understood words once spoken cannot be undone. And the words she was about to choose would not just defend her, they would teach everyone in that room who she truly was. The narrator Sep's voice returns, softer now, but piercing. She didn't know it yet, but a single action, the way she chose to respond in the next breath, would flip the entire outcome. The screen lingers. The decision is made, but not yet revealed. Fade to black. Mini cliffhanger. The tension is sharpened. The audience knows she's about to respond, but how? The promise of transformation is now set up. The room thought it knew her. Quiet. Polite. A woman of restraint. Someone who would either absorb the insult in silence or let her anger flare only to be dismissed. What they didn't realize was this: beneath her composure lived a reservoir of power, not loud, not obvious, but cultivated through years of endurance, sacrifice, and learning. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. She had lived through storms far harsher than a dinner table insult. She had survived financial droughts, nights of worry so deep she forgot the taste of sleep, the loss of friends who faded when she could no longer give. She had endured words sharper than tonight's, delivered not in a moment of carelessness, but in seasons of cruelty. And through it all, she had built something within her, a kind of intelligence born not from books or classrooms, but from survival. The narrator leans closer, voice calm, grounding us in this revelation. Hidden power is not a weapon you wield recklessly. It is the quiet arsenal built over years of hardship, waiting for the moment when it will matter most. She had learned patience, the art of waiting until the right moment to speak. She had learned perception, the ability to read not just words, but the intentions behind them. She had learned strategy, how to survive in spaces where she was underestimated, how to turn doubt into cover, invisibility into an advantage. And tonight, all of it sat quietly within her, steadying her heartbeat. The daughter-in-law didn't know it. She believed she had landed a decisive blow, reducing her to less than. But what she failed to see was the glimmer in her eyes. Not anger, not fear, but calculation. The narrator unfolds the truth for us. This is the first reversal of power. The room believed she was cornered. In reality, she was choosing her battlefield, and the one who chooses the battlefield always holds the advantage. She thought of her daughter-in-law Sip's words, "You Sefter not even half the woman my mother is." A statement of comparison, a statement meant to shame, but also, unintentionally, a statement that revealed something deeper. Why the need to measure her against another? Why the obsession with holding her up against a ghost of perfection? It was insecurity, disguised as superiority. Her lips curved almost imperceptibly. She saw it now. The insult said less about her, and more about the one who spoke it. And that recognition, that shift in perspective, was her first quiet victory. Because power isn't always in what you say. Sometimes, it's in what you understand before anyone else does. The narrator draws the lesson with surgical clarity. Here sets what that moment teaches us. The first step in reclaiming power is recognizing that insults reveal more about the speaker than the target. Once you see that, their words lose their chains. Around the table, nothing had changed. The silence was still heavy, the family still complicit. But inside her, something had tilted. She no longer felt like prey. Her hand loosened on the chair Seps's edge. Her breathing deepened, steady. A memory rose. A quiet moment years ago when she taught her children, strength isn't set about shouting. It's Seps about standing so firmly that no one can move you. Now those words weren't just advice. They were armor. She didn't need to explode. She didn't need to crumble. She only needed to wait. And when she finally did speak, it would be from a place no one could dismiss. Her daughter-in-law shifted slightly, sensing something she couldn't name. The smirk faltered. Not much, just enough for her to notice. The narrator lets the audience lean in. She didn't say it aloud, but the balance of power had already begun to shift. The one who insults often expects chaos or collapse. But when neither arrives, when the target stands calm, grounded, unshaken, the true cracks appear in the aggressor. Fade to black. Mini cliffhanger. The audience now senses her hidden strength. Subtle, strategic, growing. Suspense builds. How will this quiet intelligence survive the next blow, when the system pushes back harder? Hidden strength is powerful. But strength, when tested, must prove itself. And the world has a way of testing, often brutally. For a while she held steady. She absorbed the insult without exploding, without collapsing. Her silence wasn't weakness this time, it was strategy. And yet, systems of power don't yield so easily. Days passed, and the daughter-in-law's words didn't fade, they multiplied. Little comments at family gatherings, subtle digs masked as jokes, praise heaped upon her own mother, each compliment sharpened into a comparison. It wasn't just one insult anymore, it became a campaign. And worse, no one intervened. Her husband stayed quiet, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of habit. Her children looked away, conditioned to avoid conflict. Even the elders, who should have known better, pretended not to notice. That's how injustice works. It isn't just about the aggressor, it's about the silence of the bystanders. The narrator Sep's voice comes in, calm but cutting. Systems don't set break because of one loud enemy. They endure because of the many who stay silent. The cracks began to show. One evening, during another family dinner, the daughter-in-law struck again, this time sharper, more public. "I guess some women just aren't built for greatness," she said. her tone dripping with false sweetness, her eyes fixed like arrows. The table laughed nervously. Some tried to change the subject. Others smirked. But this time, something in her chest buckled. Her fork clattered onto the plate. The sound was small, but it echoed like a crack through the room. Her hands trembled, not with rage, but with the unbearable weight of years pressing down at once. She excused herself, voice barely steady, and walked out. The hallway was long, the light dim. Each step away from the table felt like both escape and defeat. By the time she reached her room, she closed the door, leaned against it, and slid to the floor. Tears came, hot, silent, relentless, not just from this insult, but from every moment before, every dismissal, every sacrifice erased, every time she had been told, directly or indirectly, that she was not enough. This was the breaking point. And here's the truth, even the strongest bend, even the most resilient, have moments when the pressure outweighs the endurance. The narrator softens, inviting us into the intimacy of her pain. Don't sit mistake breakdowns as weakness. They are the body sip's way of saying enough. They are not the end of strength. They are the threshold of transformation. On the floor, she pressed her hands to her face. For the first time in years, she wondered if they were right. Maybe she wasn't enough. Maybe she had given everything, only to still fall short. Doubt is the cruelest weapon, because it doesn't just silence your voice, it makes you believe silence is all you deserve. For a moment she believed it. She felt small, invisible, defeated. And yet, even in the breakdown, something flickered. A memory, a voice, a truth. Her grandmother again, as if her spirit had followed her into the room. Child, they will try to bury you in silence. But remember, seeds grow in silence too. The words cracked something open. Her tears slowed. Her breathing deepened. She wasn't ready to rise yet. But she wasn't broken either. This was not the end. It was the fracture that makes space for something new to grow. The narrator leans closer, giving us the insight to carry forward. Every story of transformation carries this moment, the breakdown, the humiliation, the seeming defeat. It is here, in the ashes, that the first sparks of rebirth are lit. She sat there, back against the door, eyes swollen, but chest steadying. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had spoken, and what it said was clear: something had to change. Fade to black. Mini cliffhanger. The audience has seen her at her lowest, cracked, humiliated, doubting herself. Suspense builds. Will she find the strength to rise? What or who will spark the turning point? The night of her breakdown lingered in her bones. She woke the next morning with swollen eyes, her body heavy as stone. Yet beneath the exhaustion was something unfamiliar. A quiet clarity. The kind that doesn't roar but whispers, steady and undeniable. She knew she couldn't go on like this. The cycle of insult and silence, the endurance without voice, it was eating her alive. And so, when the house emptied that morning, she reached for something she hadn't touched in years, her old leather-bound journal. The cover was worn, corners bent, pages filled with handwriting that told the story of a younger woman who had dreamed, fought, hoped. She opened to a random page and found words she had written decades ago during another storm in her life. When they try to define me, I must remember, I am not their words. I am my own. She froze. Tears welled again, but this time they were different. These weren't tears of despair. They were tears of recognition. It was as if her younger self, braver, unbroken, had reached through time to remind her of the truth she had forgotten. The narrator slows the rhythm, letting the audience lean in. She didn't know it yet, but this moment was the pivot. Transformation rarely begins with thunder. More often, it starts with a whisper from the past. That whisper carried her into the kitchen, where she made tea slowly, deliberately, as if each movement were an act of reclaiming space. She sat at the table and began writing again, not complaints, not wounds, but a plan. Not a plan to humiliate her daughter-in-law. Not a plan to win applause. A plan to reclaim her dignity, her center, her presence. She wrote 3 words at the top of the page: observe, prepare, deliver. She would no longer react in the moment, caught off guard by cruelty. She would observe, watch, listen, gather. She would prepare, craft her words, align them with her values, sharpen her silence into strategy. And then, when the moment was right, she would deliver, not with anger but with authority that could not be ignored. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. The narrator explains, a single action flipped the entire outcome. It wasn't sit loud, it wasn't sit grand. It was a decision to stop being defined by others and start defining herself. In the days that followed, she practiced, quietly. When the daughter-in-law slipped in a dig, she didn't flinch. She studied it, like a chess player studying an opponent's predictable move. When silence filled the room, she didn't shrink. She let it sit, growing comfortable with it, shaping her patience into strength. At night, she rehearsed, not angry outbursts but calm, grounded statements. Truths so simple they would cut deeper than any insult. Her transformation wasn't dramatic yet. From the outside, nothing seemed different, but inside, the soil had shifted. Roots were pushing deeper. And transformation, once started, has a way of radiating. Her children noticed it first, the way she carried herself, the way her eyes no longer darted downward when others spoke, the way she seemed present, grounded, immovable. Even her husband, though he said nothing, paused one evening, watching her with the faintest trace of awe. She didn't need their recognition, but it confirmed something she was beginning to know: change had already begun. The narrator offers the insight with weight. True turning points are invisible to the outside world. They happen inside, in the quiet decision to rise. The public will see the reversal later, but by then, the victory will already be sealed. She closed her journal one night, hand resting on the cover. For the first time in years, she smiled, not from politeness, but from certainty. The daughter-in-law had no idea. She still thought she held the upper hand. But soon, very soon, the battlefield would shift. Fade to black. Mini cliffhanger. The seed of transformation is planted. She now has a framework. Observe. Prepare. Deliver. Suspense builds. How will she put this plan into motion, and will it truly hold against the next confrontation? Power, once reclaimed, does not rush. It waits. It sharpens. It learns to walk quietly before it chooses to strike. In the days that followed her turning point, she became deliberate. Her journal, once a relic, now served as a compass. On its pages, she recorded every detail: the patterns of her daughter-in-law's remarks, the silences of the family, her own impulses. It was as if she had stepped back from the storm and begun to chart the weather. Observe. Prepare. Deliver. The first stage was observation, and she did it with a patience that unnerved even herself. When her daughter-in-law slipped in a casual insult about her cooking, she didn't defend, didn't frown. She simply noted the phrasing, the timing, the smirk. When comparisons were made again to her mother, she didn't take the bait. She asked a question instead, a small one, seemingly harmless. What did she say about that? The daughter-in-law faltered. Just a flicker, but enough. Because now, the script was disrupted. Instead of standing silent or retreating, she was gently turning the mirror. The narrator speaks, calm, deliberate. This is how the climb begins, not with an explosion, but with subtle moves that shift the balance, tiny fractures that eventually bring down walls. The second stage was preparation. Late at night, while the house slept, she stood in front of the mirror. Her reflection looked older, yes, but steadier. She practiced her words, calm, simple, unshakable. Not rebuttals, not insults, truths. She rehearsed the tone, even, steady, neither defensive nor aggressive. She understood now that the delivery would matter more than the words themselves. A storm doesn't announce itself with thunder first. It begins with air so still that everyone feels the change. And then came the beginnings of delivery. One afternoon, the daughter-in-law attempted a familiar jab, dressed as casual banter. Some people just don't have the energy anymore, I guess. For the first time, she responded, not with defense, but with a slow, measured smile. Energy is a matter of where you choose to place it, and I've learned to place mine where it matters. Silence fell for a heartbeat. It wasn't dramatic, but it was unmistakable, a ripple. The daughter-in-law blinked, smiled tightly, and moved on. Small victory, quiet, but undeniable. The family noticed. They didn't say it, but they saw the shift. Her husband's eyes lingered a second longer. Her children leaned in when she spoke, subtly adjusting their posture. Even the elders exchanged looks, as though something in the air had changed. And she noticed too. Each small win stacked upon the last, not as a boast, but as a reminder she was no longer playing defense. The narrator guides us deeper. She didn't sit roar. She didn't sit conquer. She climbed, quietly, deliberately, and in that silence, she was building momentum too powerful to ignore. Her daughter-in-law, however, grew restless. The insults no longer landed with the same satisfaction. Her target no longer flinched, no longer gave the performance of wounded silence that once validated her cruelty. Control was slipping, and she felt it. One evening, as they sat at the table, she delivered a sharper blow. You know, no matter what you do, you shalt never be like her. This time, the silence that followed wasn't heavy with shame. It was charged with anticipation. The protagonist met her eyes, steady, calm, unflinching. She didn't respond. Not yet. But in that silence, the family felt it. The tide was turning. The narrator leans closer, voice low, suspenseful. She didn't speak, but she didn't steat. Silence, when chosen, is not weakness. It is strategy. It is the wait before the strike. The climb was nearly complete. The reversal, inevitable. Fade to black. Mini cliffhanger. She is no longer prey. She's quietly climbing, shifting the power balance. Suspense builds. How will she seize the public reversal, the moment everyone witnesses the tables turn? There comes a moment in every story where silence ends, where observation and preparation give way to the delivery, calm, decisive, undeniable. That moment arrived on a Sunday evening. The family had gathered again, the long table heavy with food, the air heavy with tension. By now, everyone sensed the undercurrent. They noticed how she carried herself differently, how her eyes no longer dropped to the table, how her silences were no longer submission, but something sharper, steadier. The daughter-in-law noticed most of all, and it unsettled her. Control had been her power. But when control begins to slip, insecurity claws louder. And so, she pushed harder. As plates were passed, she leaned back in her chair, her voice light but cutting. Some people think endurance is a virtue, she said, eyes glinting. But really it just means you were too weak to change anything. The words landed like a gauntlet on the table. The family froze. Forks hovered midair. This was no longer subtle. This was open war. And then, she moved. Slowly, deliberately, she set her fork down. The scrape of metal against porcelain was soft, but it commanded attention. She lifted her gaze, steady as stone, and met the younger woman's eyes. Her voice was calm, low, every syllable carved with precision. You see, you're right about one thing. Endurance alone isn't set enough, but you see, endurance teaches you something far more dangerous than power, patience. And patience builds wisdom, and wisdom that sips what changes everything. The words landed not like an outburst, but like a revelation. The air shifted. Her daughter-in-law blinked, startled. She had expected anger. She had expected silence. But this calm, unshakable authority, she hadn't prepared for. The older woman didn't stop. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes still locked. You measure me against your mother. But here sits the truth. I don't need to be half of anyone. I am whole, entirely. And I will no longer stand small, just to make others feel tall. Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't shrink, but expands, pressing into every corner of the room until no one could look away. The narrator breaks in, grounding the weight of the moment. This is the reversal. The predator expected collapse. Instead, she met the mirror. And in that reflection, she saw herself undone. Her daughter-in-law opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The confidence, the smirk, the casual cruelty, all of it faltered. And then something even more powerful happened. The husband, who had long stayed silent, cleared his throat. His voice was quiet, almost unsure, but steady enough. She sits right. And it sits time we all stopped pretending not to hear the way you speak to her. Gasps. Movement around the table. For years, silence had been the accomplice. But once broken, silence cannot be rebuilt. The children looked from one parent to another, their faces caught between shock and relief. Even the elders shifted uncomfortably, forced to confront what they had ignored. The daughter-in-law's cheeks flushed crimson. She tried to laugh it off, but the sound was thin, fragile. Her power had evaporated in front of everyone. The protagonist didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She simply sat back, her presence filling the room in a way it never had before. The narrator draws the moral thread. A single action flipped the entire outcome. Not shouting, not humiliation, but truth, spoken calmly, carried the weight of a lifetime. That is the difference between reaction and strategy, between noise and power. The daughter-in-law avoided her gaze now, her plate suddenly fascinating. The balance had shifted entirely. For the first time in years, the older woman felt not invisible, not diminished, but seen, entirely, unmistakably seen. Fade to black. Mini cliffhanger. The public reversal has happened. The aggressor has been exposed, the silence broken, the system destabilized. Suspense now moves to the aftermath. What will ripple outward from this moment? Who will pay the cost? And how will redemption unfold? The room didn't look the same anymore. It wasn't the table, the food, or the walls. Those were unchanged. What shifted was the air. The silence that once suffocated now carried weight, clarity, consequence. Her daughter-in-law kept her gaze fixed downward, fork moving in awkward motions, though no one noticed the food. Her power, once sharp, unchecked, now sat fractured, exposed. The family stirred uneasily. Years of complicity had been shattered by a single moment of truth. The husband Sip's words still echoed. It Sip's time we all stopped pretending not to hear. For the first time, the silence was not hers to bear. It belonged to everyone. The narrator draws the thread together. This is the nature of aftermath. When truth finally enters a room, it does not leave things as they were. It demands a reckoning. For the aggressor, for the bystanders, for the system itself. Over the following weeks, the ripples spread. The daughter-in-law grew quieter, less certain. Her remarks dulled. Her smirk dimmed. She was not destroyed. That was never the goal, but she was confronted, humbled. And in that humility, the sharp edges of her cruelty began to soften. The husband, long silent, began to find his voice, tentative at first, but firmer each time. He asked questions he had never dared before. He defended when defense was needed, and though guilt shadowed his eyes, there was also resolve, the quiet work of redemption. The children watched, and in watching, learned. They saw their mother not as diminished, but as unshakable. They carried her words with them, tucked away as armor for battles they too would face one day. And she, the woman once seated in shame, walked lighter, now. Not because the world had transformed overnight, but because she had reclaimed her seat at the table, her voice, herself. She understood something vital. Victory isn't always loud. Sometimes, victory is simply refusing to be erased. The narrator slows, voice steady, almost like a professor drawing the final lesson. Here's what that moment teaches us. Power isn't set in silencing others. Power is in refusing to be silenced yourself. And when one person stands, even quietly, they invite others to do the same. That is how legacies begin. The story widens, transcending the single-family table. Everywhere, there are tables like this one. Workplaces, homes, communities. And at those tables there are those who wound with words, and those who sit silent, enduring. But endurance alone is not the end. With patience, with clarity, endurance becomes transformation. She didn't just win for herself, she reset the room, she forced silence to break. And in doing so, she created a model for what resilience, strategy, and dignity can look like when tested. Legacy is not measured in applause. It is measured in the changes that remain after you leave the room. Her legacy was this. Her children would never forget the night their mother rose with quiet authority. Her husband would never again be able to claim ignorance. And her daughter-in-law, though perhaps ashamed, had been given an unexpected gift, a mirror, and the chance to change. The narrator sits, tone shifts, offering the audience a challenge. And now, the question is not just about her, it is about you. What tables do you sit at? What silences have you endured? And what moment, calm, deliberate, strategic, waits for you to reclaim your own seat? The voice softens, but grows heavier with moral weight. Don't mistake this story for mere entertainment. It is a call to resilience, to strategy, to transformation, not to shout down injustice, but to dismantle it with patience and wisdom. And then, the final invitation. If this story resonated with you, let it move beyond the screen. Share it. Discuss it. Reflect on it. And if you believe in stories that remind us of the power to endure, transform, and rise, like, comment, and subscribe. Because the more we tell these stories, the more we create a legacy that outlives us. The screen fades, not to black, but to a slow image of a candle flame, small, steady, unshaken. Fade out.